Thanks. My name's, as been introduced, John Hooper, Executive Officer, Neighbourhood Houses, Tasmania. Where am I pointing? But I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Simon Wiggins from Avidity Training and Development, who showed up. And it's actually with a sense of a bit of privilege and terror that I'm presenting to you today on behalf of the 35 neighbourhood houses across the state. Just to be clear, I'm not a vocational training expert, so now you're going, why is he here? But Simon is. But the houses I work with are experts in engaging the most vulnerable members of their low income and disadvantaged communities, the isolated communities around Tasmania. Engaging those people who are disconnected, who are unemployed, who are stuck at home, who are dealing with mental illness, isolated and lonely, but people who also want to be able to make a difference to build a better community. What we're presenting here today, I think I might have been put here as the disruptor. I don't know. So you're probably going to want to have rocks to throw at me. I'm going to speak a bit of truth. But that despite many barriers and past disappointments for our communities, that in partnership, good, adapted, localised training in disadvantaged urban and regional and isolated communities can be delivered and create real pathways for people back into community, back to being who they were before, back to confidence as a person, as a parent, back to being a contributing member of their community and aspiring for themselves and their families. And that's that pathway that I want to talk about, because the next step is people going on to apprenticeships and training that leads directly to employment. But we want to talk about that bit before, because that's the bit we feel has gotten a bit forgotten. Too far. So we're going to talk about just what are neighbourhood houses. You need to understand the context and why training through neighbourhood houses and in neighbourhood houses can transform lives. Talk about our past disappointment with training and the training system for our network, what wasn't working for communities. And I've already spoken to people today in leadership positions in TASTAFE and in the state government who get this, they know this, they probably don't want to hear it again, but I need to speak for communities about we have to do better. I'm going to talk about the turning of the tide that happened to us, why the Avidity partnership worked. I'm going to talk about Feehelp, sorry. You're again probably sick of talking about that, but we have to learn from it. It's a failure of industry, it's a failure of governance, and it's a failure of regulation. So how do we fix that and do it better? But then I want to talk about hope, because pathways are back in vogue, it feels like. And then Simon's going to talk about the actual vet mechanics of it and the theory of it, and I'll try and give him a couple of minutes at the end. So just what are neighbourhood houses and how through training can they transform lives? So let's talk about what real pathways mean for people. And a local neighbourhood house conducted a Cert 2 in community services with Avidity. People filled out evaluations afterwards, and we've got a quote here from a volunteer at a local house who's now gone on to a Cert 3 and is volunteering at the house. But we talk about how do we get people employment ready and all that sort of stuff. I talked to a neighbourhood house the other day where the volunteers and staff went across the road to stop two young people kicking another person on the ground, had to break up a brawl, 10 cop cars turned up. When we talk about how we create pathways into training, we've got to talk about the horror stories that some communities are living through, so we can't pretend that sitting in front of a computer at home is going to get people a job. There's a lot of barriers. But this is a story of hope. Before I started training at the house, I was seeing a psychologist fortnightly. Now my appointments are self-directed and I probably only see him every 6 weeks or so. My health has improved a lot. She went on. I now feel more confident and worthy of respect. I have a reason to get out of bed each day, and I have now removed the cardboard from my mirrors at home and can look at myself. So that's what we're talking about, what pathways can do for people, but where people are coming from. So let's be real. This is the Neighbourhood House Network. We're the peak body for the 35 neighbourhood houses around the state, as you can see, on some of the islands, as the Minister and Mark was speaking for. But from Zeehan to St Helens, Georgetown in the north to Geeveston in the south, and mostly in broadacre public housing communities. Some of them have been there over 30 years, some are 12 years old, but also are really regionally isolated communities. But to understand the pathways that neighbourhood houses produce, when I get asked at a barbecue, what's a neighbourhood house, what do they do? I sigh, because you've got to tell the stories of what people go through. And so our neighbourhood houses got together, everyone donated some money, and we got a local filmmaker, Josh Lamont, to try and tell the story of what neighbourhood houses do. Let's hope it works, Jeff. Here we go.
an individual takes that step and reaches out for help and is met not by thin air but by a human, that connection can be life-changing. Sometimes all it takes is a warm welcome, a smiling face, an ear that doesn't judge, and a mouth that doesn't ask too many questions. We know the power of the simplest connection. So we put the hours in tending to our gardens. We feed conversations over lunch. We see bonds form in our sheds. And we nurture families to grow stronger through support. That open door can lead to a newfound skill, which can lead to training, which can lead to a fulfilling job. And that can lead to confidence, a sense of belonging, and the chance to grow. So that individual becomes a thriving member of their community.
Thank you. I think I need to do this. Thank you. So that was a community development project in its sense. So that was filmed at 5 local neighbourhood houses. All of those people are volunteers or participants at houses, and the filmmaker just filmed and somehow made that for us. But that's what happens. And you can immediately see what the potential is to leverage training off those sort of environments. Neighbourhood houses are run by the community for the community. Anything could be happening in a neighbourhood house. You could get assistance to fill in a form, purchase some locally grown vegetables from the food co-op, be part of a community lunch. There's always food. There is always food. Food brings people. It might be a yoga class or a community shed. But we talked about transport access. You can find a mentor to help you get your driver's licence. There's mad volunteers that get into cars with young people to help them get their L's so that they can get a job that requires transport. Improve your literacy skills. You might be referred for family violence support. You might grow veggies in the garden or do a certificate course in community services or hospitality. One of our again, just off previous presentation, one of our neighbourhood houses has seen the failure of the labour market in their community, the forestry downturn, and down at Geeveston, they've also seen how labour hire can be misused and exploited, and have created their own ethical labour hire company. So I'm on the board of that, and we're trying to put all those small jobs together to enable people to have a real job and find employment through the seasonal variations from cherry industry to the forestry industry. But that's all happening at a community level. So sometimes we feel the focus on community development neighbourhood houses have that they're run by the community for the community, that they're run by a local governance board that is volunteers and people from that local community, and the state governments have invested in that model. They know that if you give communities access to the resources and let them choose where to focus their energy, they'll make great decisions and create great programs for people. And so it's that community development model that's sometimes a bit poo-pooed. It's just a community lunch. Well, yeah, it is a community lunch, but that brings people together who've been stuck in their house and moves from isolation to a point of engagement. And then other things happen on top of that. So this is a quote from Pete at Ravenswood, which is a broadacre public housing community in the north. And Pete's now the president of the neighbourhood house. But what results over time is confidence, a sense of belonging, a safe place that is just there, friendships, hope, pathways, and ultimately the community benefits and grows from all these very subtle, perhaps very ordinary occurrences that allow people a chance to become who they were before. And that quote's here I go again. That quote's important because Pete, when I met him probably 4 years ago, had just come from a point he hadn't basically left his house for 4 years and was drinking himself to death. Prior to that, he'd been running his own business, landscaping business, for about 20 years, was involved in fishing and recreation state associations, but had an injury at work that led to a spiral to losing his business, losing himself, as he would say, and ended up drinking himself in his public housing unit up at Ravenswood. but he still grew veggies. And so the neighbourhood house, the neighbour said, why don't you give your excess to the house? They've got a food co-op. And so we rang them and they did. And they kept talking to him, kept visiting, kept picking it up and said, when you're ready, come down. And he was scared, we're recorded, scared somethingless, as he would say, and but did go down and kept going down. And then he got involved. And as he said, he started volunteering and doing bits and pieces. But soon he talked about his history of associations. So the house saw the opportunity and said, do you want to come onto our committee? Do you want to come onto our board? And he thought he wanted to. And then at the same time, Avidity were running a Cert 2 in community services at the house that was built around the volunteering pathway around governance. So it was mostly people who were prospective and current committee members to learn about governance, and so they built the training around their need to do better as a committee and wanting to be on the committee. And he said it was brilliant. And so he hadn't been to school in years, but because he wanted to be on the committee, he loved it. And so now he's the president of the house, he's rewritten the constitution, he volunteers there 4 days a week, he leads their community garden, he teaches other people how to grow fruit and vegetables in their own home. So that's the pathway Pete's been on. For him, given his age and where he is, it hasn't led to a job at the end. But he's a thriving and contributing member of his community, and that's what training can do. You all know that. You know these stories. But what I want to talk about... Oh, there he is. I forgot to show him. Not surprisingly, he also does Santa for the local community as well. There's 13,500 contacts at each neighbourhood house every year. That might not be, that's not 13,500 individuals, that's repeat contacts for purpose. That's 281 contacts a week. But here's the pathway, 189,000 volunteering hours across the network that aggregates out to about 120 hours or over 3 full-time equivalents of volunteering. There's 26 volunteer contributions to each house's activities in a week. So we know volunteers are important. But connecting people to training in houses works. I forgot to start my timer. There we go. Okay. But houses aren't just a venue. They provide those opportunities to people to build training off those volunteering opportunities. The training work when it's attached to meaning and purpose. Training for training's sake and all the worst excesses we saw of the employment services system over the last decade is useless to people. I know people who've got 6 Cert 2s. I'm an advocate for Cert 2s and the role they play when they're done well, when they're attached to meaning and purpose for people. So you'd think it'd be easy to leverage good training into communities, that the potential would be there, and Tassie needs a workforce, we know that. We're just talking about unemployment statistics, and I did a quick search. We talk about 6% unemployment, but in southern Tasmania that means 7,000 people. 7,000 people, that's a stunning number. 700,000 nationally. So when we talk percentages, we forget these are are there 700,000 jobs in Australia right now, waiting for people? So we've got some challenges. So our members have been talking to us and we were really struggling to get good training, adapted training into their local communities, to work in community. So Skills Tas were really great. They got on board and funded some workforce mapping of our staff, volunteers and community participants. And could communities describe the disappointment? All the stuff that you could probably point to. Centralised training. Local was too expensive and too hard. We couldn't get people to come to St Helens, to come to Xian, to come to Geeveston. It wasn't adapted to the context or role of people. You know, people like Pete, where it could have a real potential. Trainers were continually changing, so the relationships around training are so crucial. I should occasionally look at my notes. Over-promising and under-delivering was a constant for our network, that RTOs that would be saying, yep, we'll come out, we'll do it, get us, and you had to have 15 people and then it'll all happen. But then all of a sudden it collapsed away and it was, if you get to Launceston, we can run the training for your people. People were also overwhelmed with paperwork. You all know the training industry, a lot of the compliance around it just makes it really hard for learners to understand what the hell they're supposed to be studying and how it's all going to work. So that again is a challenge. Then we talked about, well, what will work? And it was basically do the opposite. It needs to be local. It needs to be literally in-house and on the job, and on the volunteer role. It needs to be relevant, appropriate to individual needs and learning styles. It needs to be supported. It needs to involve how do people access childcare and literacy support while they're at the neighbourhood house doing training. needs to be affordable. It needs to involve a clear induction process. It needs to involve plain language and not training industry jargon. An assessment needs to be consistent and relevant regardless of the trainer that delivers it. Again, you can see the problems that sit behind that. Probably a lot of you would say, oh, that's an industry standard. That's how we all operate and how we should operate. Unfortunately, it's not. I've sat on different funding applications from training bodies and training, and you read, we're flexible, adaptable, we're local, we individualise to the learner. That's not been the lived reality, I'm sorry. For a lot of, and I'm generalising, there's a lot of great trainers in this room and a lot of great work being done with our local houses, with whether it's TAFE or Avidity or other RTOs, but consistently over the last decade it's dropped away, and that outreach into communities, particularly on that pathways, has not been good. And we know the right trainer is fundamental. It's all about the relationship and the trust. They need to be reliable, approachable, supportive, but give clear direction about what's required in plain language. They need to understand the neighbourhood house context and the person's life context, and they need to uphold their part of the deal. Good communication between everyone and the neighbourhood house with training is vital. So, right. With our frustrations, we actually developed a partnership with Avidity, which Training and Development, which Simon will talk about. When we say we, I want to acknowledge Karen Austin, who's in the room, and Carmen from Avidity Training and Development, who've been probably the two people doing a lot of the grunt work around this, and Simon and I just stand up and take the glory, and you can put a gender analysis over that. It's probably fair. So we developed an MOU with Avidity that said, we want the opposite of what's not working. We expect you to deliver locally, we expect you to deliver to be adapted, and you need to sign off that this is how you'll work with every one of our neighbourhood houses. And madly, they did. But they get houses what to do, what houses do and how they operate. They've been true to their word. Carmen and the team go out and talk to houses about the training that they need. Then they work with us to try and seek funding and the different buckets, and Skills has been great about trying to leverage money into local communities. There's not enough, but we'd love more, we keep saying that. But then it's then about, before people actually get to the point of signing up and doing the training, they go back out into that community and sit down with people and do that plain language discussion. So people really know what they're getting and what they're getting into and what they're committing to, and the house does. They've responded quickly and adapted when things haven't worked. We have robust conversations because houses ring us up and F and Avidity did this. We can have that conversation with Simon and Carmen about, okay, and they'll know about it generally before we do, and go back and fix it. Or with a trainer who needs to do things differently. So it's been about trust and accountability. So what's happened? I hear you like stats. That's probably what you're all here for. I'm not going to have many. Between 2014 and 2017, we've just summarised what's happened through over 20 houses throughout Tasmania. There's probably more work than that, but that's just one of the stats I pulled out quickly for today. That's 387 individuals. Now, that's not a big number probably for some of the national organisations that are here and TASTAFE, New South Wales. But in Tassie, that's significant when you think about these are 20 communities, and these are people coming from significant places of disadvantage. And they've done all of those different quals that you can see there, all built and adapted around what those neighbourhood houses do and what those volunteers do. So just a bit of a snapshot around the outcomes. There were 6 programs assessed in 2015-16, and there was a data cohort I pulled out for this from those 6 communities. And you can see that 74% completed. Of those 39, they were contacted 3 months post the training to see where they were at. 41% employment outcomes for training completed that year, and 39% continued on to further education and training. So while I say I don't want to talk about training equals job at the end, it also does when it does well on this pathway. And then there was the industry, and then with Vet Feehelp. So at the same time in 2014, on July 1, we had 7 communities ringing us, talking to Karen, saying there's guys in suits from Queensland walking the streets, knocking on doors, offering free laptops and iPads, etc, etc, etc. You don't have to pay. There's a little bit down the bottom that says, you know, once you earn this much, you'll pay. It also was very cleverly leveraged off the back of the potential 2014 federal budget that had the whole earn or learn thing happening. You know, or your payment gets cut off, even though that didn't go through. So this was appalling, and I don't want to rub your noses in it, but we Facebooked, we ran Consumer Affairs, ASQA, Skills TAS, government ministers. This was parasitic free market economics at its best. And it was interesting to hear Adrian talk about the worst of the what you called ITOs. I've lost where you are. There you are. And having people signed up who are dead. I mean, what we saw with Feehelp, and unfortunately the stories to continue to come out, is that an unregulated private sector, there will be people who will exploit loopholes and make the most of it. And so anyone who says that in this area that the markets will decide and will sort it out, that's crap. It doesn't work. We need stronger regulation. We need regulation around... Thank you. That's good. We need regulation around how these businesses operate, just not how they do with compliance around the certificate for and the paper they produce. You all know this, I'm sorry to say it, but how do we learn from this and how do we do it better? I also want to take the opportunity to talk about... we're shutting the door now after the horse has bolted, and we sat down with Simon Birmingham, and he was great, and he just said, tell us what's going on. That was probably a couple of years ago. And since then, the federal government's looked to... And this was a Labor program that came in, and no one and everyone is to blame, really. So how do we learn from it? I want to say that the default now needs to be that vet fee help debts from 2014-16 have to be forgiven. They have to be wiped. Unless it can be proved that someone got a worthwhile qualification out of that or a credit. In 10 years' time, that person will get aspiration and they'll get a job, and all of a sudden they'll go, what debt? They signed up for a laptop and an iPad at the lowest point in their life, and they can't have a complicated system to have that debt waived and dealt with, or when they go for a loan. So I would hope that with vocational research in the room here, we can look at some of the analysis around that, forgive me if it's being done, and actually the default should be forgive before people have to keep that debt, and then chase the buggers that did the bad training. And kudos to the ACCC. Oh, a call, great. Okay. So that's the worst, but there is hope. Before Simon talks, I want to congratulate Skills TAS and the state government who invested in Neighbourhood Houses and invested in the community development model, but have seen the pathways, opportunities there and funded us and Avidity to do this work. I've talked about all of that. Also that Skills TAS has recently funded a trial of volunteers as part of workforce development in the community services sector, and that's a great innovation that's great because it will deliver real pathways and real training for people. And so I still find that it's still too hard to leverage training in our communities. It's still too hard to get this work funded. I don't believe that a competitive tendering method of funding fits around accountability, but it doesn't fit around delivery for disadvantaged communities. So we have to find other ways. But without further ado, I'll pass over to Simon, who'll talk to you about how they did it.
Hello. We work in a very, very interesting space with community houses, which are all not-for-profit. We work in the not-for-very-much profit because what we do is extraordinarily expensive. When we set up the RTO, we were initially hospitality trainers. I'm a chef. I had 20 years in kitchens, and we were doing commercial cookery, basically. What Avidity is, it's about eagerness and a positive feeling of want to push ahead with enthusiasm and dedication, and that's what we wanted to be the hallmark of our business. When we went I met John as part of the Tasmanian Leaders Program, and he was talking about who they were and what they did, and we thought, well, we could probably do something in that space and do it differently. I didn't want to use the word better, but do it differently. How could we engage with people that had left school at the end of grade 9, were homeless, mental health, drug and alcohol, no educational aspirations, no employment aspirations, and they were the good ones. No, that's what we were looking at. What could we do with them? The research will tell you that everybody needs a Certificate 3 because it improves the quality of life and you're going to get all of these wonderful benefits. That's the end point. It's not where we start and it's not what we should be enrolling people into. So I won't go back to John's put job seekers into diplomas. That's not going to work. We know that. So what we came up with was what we refer to as the Employability Spectrum. And what it did was it gave our business key focus points on where we would put our activity, or where we would put our energy in developing product to work with different cohorts of learners. When we talk about pre-employment, which is usually, in a lot of cases, it's a Certificate 3, what we knew was that that wasn't going to work when you have very, very low-level LLN skills, or when you have none of those aspirational goals, or you have significant barriers. So we broke pre-employment down into 3 separate streams: pre-vocational, pre-employment and employment. The objective of an employment program is to get a job at the end of it. You are job ready Monday morning, you can start work. But to get a person to that point, we had to teach, in some cases, how to read, how to write, how to get secure a bed at the end of each day so that they knew where they were going to sleep. So our pre-vocational programs, which are generally non-accredited, addressed all of those life issues. Our pre-employments were the Certificate 1 in foundation skills, the Certificate 1 community services, business, these types of qualifications. The most difficult thing that we found was building a workforce within our business that was capable of working with these guys. We had to develop really, really good staff that could deal with the LLN issues. We had to have community service workers. We employed counsellors, social workers, LLN experts. And over the space of 3 years, we built a workforce that could achieve the results that the Neighbourhood Houses wanted. The other point that we said right at the very beginning was, it was about integrity. We said if we were going to do this, we were going to be there from the start right to the finish. If we said that we were going to start, we would run it. We're based in Launceston. We were running programs in Geeveston, which is a 4.5-hour drive away, with 6 people. But we still sent people down there because we made the commitment that we were going to do it. Everything that we've done with the Neighbourhood Houses and the results of what we've got out of it, or what we have achieved, what John was saying earlier, it just comes down to, I suppose, this thing here, is that, sorry, the true measure of your worth includes all the benefits others have gained from your successes. So we now are probably the largest equity RTO working in Tasmania outside the public provider. We employ 15 people. We've just opened an office in Hobart. We're now doing this with child and family centres, neighbourhood houses. We work with Link Tasmania. We will go out into the communities where people are. We don't have campuses. We don't bring the students to us. We go to where they're engaged. In the employability spectrum, we've now moved into workplace traineeships and apprenticeships. We have taken job seekers, we've got them engaged, we've got them started, and now we're taking them right through. We're getting somewhere around 10 enrolments per week. And that's been going on for the last 18 months. So the business is just growing and growing and growing because I think it's a unique point of difference to a lot of other RTOs. We don't sell qualifications, we sell solutions. And everything that we do it's all about that trust. If we say we're going to do something, we do it, we see it through. That's how we've managed to do what we've done. And we believe that the Neighbourhood Houses Tasmania are relatively happy with what we've achieved because they keep inviting us back. I think that's time. Thank you very much.